And to me, that's one of the other things is like, I'm not interested in integrating Bitcoin into the state. I'm interested in Bitcoin displaying how powerless the state is. And so I much rather prefer a method of like having them attack Bitcoin, showing how incompetent and stupid they are.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with Eric on this one. Like, Bitcoin is not going to be the savior of the government, and trying to integrate it into the government is it's so silly. Yeah, incredibly backwards. We have a technology that in Bitcoin that liberates the individual and frees them from the slave relationship with the state. And that's where it's powerful. And to watch the state be powerless over being able to manage Bitcoin and manage people is incredibly exciting. But welcome to the Tucson Bitcoin podcast. My guest today is Erik Cason. I'm really stoked on this conversation. It's just so awesome to sit down with him and have the opportunity to pick his brain. He's put out so many good articles. Awesome writer, been on so many podcasts, so well articulated, and I think he is very in tune with the future that we're going into. And it's interesting to pick his brain and like, what does governance look like in the future? How do we organize as societies? How does Bitcoin fundamentally change the relationship with government? And how does it free the individual? Just awesome conversation. But yeah, before we get into it, we've got awesome things happening in Arizona. The meetup scenes are popping. We've got some awesome events coming up. We have a Halloween party happening in Phoenix with Brian Harrington. He's coming out. He's the organizer, one of the organizers of the Orange County Bitcoin scene, and he's a good friend of mine. Really stoked for that. We just had our Sierra Vista meetup, and that was a blast. If you don't want to be depressed, like, go and hang out with Bitcoiners, and if you want to be a NIM, do it online. But having these conversations and seeing people that are moving, that are not lemmings, that are not just going along with whatever the narrative is and just giving over their rights and are really taking things into their own hands and becoming more sovereign is so incredibly exhilarating and rejuvenating. And yeah, I am super stoked about what's happening here. I'm super stoked about all the meetups across the United States and even the world, where people are getting together and having treasonous conversations. Yeah, anyways, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Cool, we're recording. It's great to have you on again, Erik.
Thank you.
The last time I had you on, I had a very poor understanding of anarchism and crypto anarchism, and have been somewhat educated on it. I'm definitely like going down the rabbit hole a bit. I've read a ton since then. Read your work. Read some of Alex Svetsky's work. I recently was suggested to read Larkin Rose's book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that one, but that has really broken down some of faulty beliefs I've had. And yeah, I'm coming around to this anarchist idea. I think it's incredible. I don't see the importance of I see democracy actually as something that's problematic, and I think Bitcoin really allows for, like, in some of the things that you've been talking about, other interviews, like, Bitcoin allows for this anarcho-capitalist future in a really powerful, meaningful way. So that's kind of been my journey since we talked.
Yeah, I've found contemporary times more than anything has really allowed for people to understand my viewpoint, and like that word democracy is so loaded, because to me, like anarchism really is like the most purest form of democracy actualized. But because it's like this totally other idea of inclusivism, like through the actual communes that are created through the ability of people to make mutualized agreements, like that's what allows for like the true democracy to actually bloom, which we can't understand that in contemporary age, because we use this word democracy, but it's actually kind of this inverted totalitarianism where, like, well, like, you know, all the black people who have been in prison, like they don't get rights to vote, and like anybody else who the state doesn't like, they don't get to vote. And like if you don't do it in this extremely narrow spot, you know, like it doesn't count. So at best, like democracy matters what, like once every 4 years or so. And even with that, it's so deeply propagandized that there's no real solution. Um, but yeah, you know, I think one of the things that's most interesting about in this day and age, specifically with Bitcoin, is the idea of anarcho-capitalism. I don't want to say it was untenable before Bitcoin, but like there was clearly this very important apparatus of being able to like essentially extract the state from the equation in some methodology that was never available. And like with the formation of Bitcoin, what I see is essentially like the tensions between anarchism and capitalism that like fundamentally can't coexist with the state through Bitcoin essentially fused back into each other through like a Hegelian synthesis. And what I actually think we're seeing the production of is what I would call something similar to like crypto syndicalism. I'm not sure. Are you familiar with the idea of syndicalism? Have you came across that in your readings?
Very, very surface level, but I am somewhat familiar with it.
Yeah, essentially, like this was one of the strategies that anarchists came up with after they split from the communists in the 1860s. Was essentially that, like through the network directly, and like whether that's like a guilds network or a trade union network or an organizers of water rights, like whatever the collective is, the collective itself creates its own power. And this is actually what the trade unionist movement in the very powerful trade unionist movements, both in France and Germany, came like this is part of what they developed out of. And even more interestingly is the syndicalists, they took stuff even further. And this is part of kind of how fascism developed in Italy. And like Benito Mussolini was one of the early syndicalists who essentially absorbed syndicalist ideas and then took it to this extreme place that we recognize as fascism today. But another good example that I kind of see Bitcoin as is in a lot of ways, like Satoshi is almost this individual that declared a dictatorship and like made the decision about what the monetary supply was going to be. And like that's sort of his authority, or the Latin word would be like auctorus, like the actual authorship over what happened. And we've all rallied behind that idea. And it's interesting because, again, we get these sort of tensions that resolve themselves through a digital being of that, like we have Satoshi as like our great leader, but like who is Satoshi and like what does it mean that he's gone? And so it creates this very different and powerful dynamic that I think we're pretty unfamiliar with just because we haven't been able to produce these sort of things in the world until we had the internet. So
Yeah, yeah, it's really, really interesting. Do you kind of going back to that idea of syndicalism? Do you see, Bitcoin organizations organizing together essentially to protect themselves from the state, or push back collectively? Like, how do you?
I think that the protocol itself is like like that is actual layer one on that protection. Like the network functions, you can't take it down. It's pretty clear, even with major nation states outlawing it, like China, that the hash rate is going to bounce back and redistribute in a more powerful mechanism. And I think more and more, because we're seeing businesses get on board, we're seeing the state becoming more actively involved looking at it. And so I think what's probably going to happen is we'll get a bunch of them. Actually, we'll get protocol level developments that continue to ensure stronger ability for both privacy on the transaction level and on the individual ledger level. And I also think that we're going to see business organizations starting to form to push back against it. And ultimately, what we're also seeing with the SEC sniffing around and poking around is there's a whole number of players in crypto. And as much as like toxic Bitcoin maximalism is like trying to destroy them, like they are actually like our friends. And pretty interestingly, I see them friends in the way that like the Roman classes saw the patricians and the plebeians, how they saw each other as quote unquote friends. Like there were two classes of enemies that actually like made a peace amongst themselves in order to be able to like make their way of living push out farther into the world. And so I think as Bitcoiners, there was a great tweet that Hector had that I retweeted that essentially his stance was like, look, like Bitcoin's the monetary proposition, and that's what we want to be. There's other innovation going on in crypto that's important and helpful, but like stop pretending that like you guys are a monetary standard. You're not. And like so long as you continue to do that, you're probably going to continue to piss off Bitcoiners. So I think that kind of explains part of my perspective with it. And so we're seeing those players in the crypto field starting to organize essentially to create super PACs and other things to push back politically. And so I do think that we'll see fights starting to happen on a political front. And to me, like this is kind of the powerful decentral method of self-organization that like is its actual defense system like already at play. And we saw this happen in 2017 with the block wars as well. Like when all of that bullshit was playing out, essentially the decentralized network was able to like activate its immune system to have a grassroots level response that in a lot of ways saved Bitcoin from that internal civil war.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, we on my other show, Toxic Airwaves, last week, we had a big debate on whether it was, worth the effort to donate money to these super PACs or to engage in the political system. And my co-host and I took the stance it really wasn't worth the effort, and that the protocol itself, kind of like you were talking about, is rock solid and can withstand the attacks. It's these efforts seem to be to protect the industry, the companies. What's your take on that? Do you think it's worth engaging in the political system in relation to Bitcoin, or kind of going a different route of seeking to protect yourself and create change, like from a more underground method?
Uh, I personally prefer the latter. Like I don't want to fault anybody for trying the former. Like I think it's a noble cause. I've just I've had my teeth kicked in enough by the political system that I realize that like this is all smoke and mirrors. Like you play this game perfectly to a T, they're gonna disqualify you in some way because like you're not a player in the game. Like to and to me that's one of the other things is like I'm not interested in integrating Bitcoin into the state. I'm interested in Bitcoin displaying how powerless the state is. And so I much rather prefer a method of like having them attack Bitcoin, showing how incompetent and stupid they are, and being able to speak to that nature directly. Because like maybe we can create some new form of Republican democracy vis-a-vis liquid democracy and some kind of neo-republicanism that can get created with the internet. But like this antiquated system's fucked. Like we have all these geriatrics that are making decisions to prolong their health by a couple of years at the sacrifice of the youth. And like this is all wrong and messed up, and it's time for us to dignify ourselves and say we don't want this system, and if we have any semblance of democracy we should be able to exit from it, and that there's no meaningful exit right now. So to me, Bitcoin allows for us to attack the economic system, which is the most important component of how their whole system functions. And as it falls apart, I would much rather have us pretty much say, yeah, you guys are on fire. We're not going to save you, and too bad, rather than having this sort of whole regulatory system that's like, hey, exchanges get the 6102, everybody. We're going to premiere USD coin. You get USD coin instead of your Bitcoin. Bitcoin becomes part of our treasury. To me, that's like a much more messy proposition because like that like allows for them to parasitically exist with Bitcoin much longer than I'd like them to. So essentially, like I want to see a collective of individuals that essentially are Bitcoiners, only accept Bitcoin for payment, engage in peer-to-peer transactions, hold their own keys, and also understand the need for using methods such as CoinJoin and supporting secondary layers like Lightning to be able to kind of more robustly develop it. And I think as all these things develop on the outside, our network becomes stronger and stronger. And we essentially start modeling a method of dual power, where essentially because of how fucked all of the general systems are, instead of somebody trying to figure out how to get a bank account and how to do financing for their business in the old world, they're just going to get themselves onto the Lightning Network, get themselves, you know, some kind of cold storage wallet, understand Bitcoin, and engage in business that way, and kind of move to in a much more private and personalized direction as opposed to, you know, trying to play well with the state. But again, I want to emphasize, like good luck. I think it's important that people try to pursue that path. And I really hope when it doesn't work, like they'll come over to our side and be like, yeah, like fuck these guys. Let's just figure out how to destroy them.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, and that's pretty in line with the arguments we were making on our show, and what I believe, because I think the incentives are totally backwards in trying to do that. Like these politicians, their authority comes from this fiat system of decree, and it for them to embrace Bitcoin in any way is actually moving against their interests and agendas. And so I think it's a waste of time. It's kind of interesting. But
Yeah, you know, and it's a really contorted and frankly evil thing that like these are the incentives and how they've lined up with it. Because like one of the things that I see in Bitcoin and I know others see as well is that like this has the true deep American values of liberty and freedom for individuals to make choices and what that means in the world. And I think it's very important that, you know, if this political route is to be successful, and Bitcoin was to, you know, say, for example, become legal tender in the United States and utilized in that way, I see this as one of the only things we can do on a global stage to counter the coming, you know, central digital currencies, Chinese social credit system stuff. And I think it's extremely important that as Americans, we continue to be that bastion of light out in the world for individuals to know that as fucked up as stuff is, these American values can still survive. And I also readily acknowledge that like that stuff's been pretty extinguished from the American psyche for the last century or so. And I really hope that we'll recover it because it's extremely important that in this digital age, we not only continue to be able to be a global community that can transact, you know, so that I can transact with friends in Palestine, Afghanistan, South Africa, or wherever, but furthermore, that like this becomes a true peer-to-peer interaction that allows for us to become a large global community that actually has a fair opportunity economically across the board globally. Um, and I would love to see that become part of our contemporary political system, but I think it's impossible with the current paradigm. Perhaps we can like have states make it into their own official currency and like have some Soviet style dissolution happen for the United States. But at this point in time, like I don't see, I have a really hard time seeing how Bitcoin is going to play nice in the contemporary political system. Um, and that's also like part of the hilarious like Trojan horse that's a trap is like I think they're gonna bring it in and try to integrate it, and they're gonna like figure out like oh shit like it's a bunch of anarchists inside that are here to burn down the system. Oh
yeah, and when I think it's important to preface the idea of like burning down the system, it's different than what like Antifa is trying to do. Uh, I don't think it.
sure.
I don't think it's destructive. It's trying to render a system that is built to victimize people powerless and empower individuals rather than just replace it with some other crazy totalitarian alternative. So
Absolutely, and I would say that you know this is like Joseph Schumpeter's creative destruction. Like this is about fundamentally advancing and changing the way that we do monetary transactions because of how egregiously our forms and systems of government have not only violated our privacy, but have actually created forms of lawlessness because of their inability to control this fiat system and the way it's eating us. And so, like, when I say burn it down, like, I'm not meaning literally burn it down. And furthermore, you know, Bitcoin is what it is, and it's inherently nonviolent, which is, you know, in my opinion, the thing that allows for it to move from this jurisdiction of just being radical and revolutionary to actually being messianic is that, like, it is a nonviolent apparatus that we're using, and the form of power that we're creating, it's a destituent one as opposed to a constituent one. Like, we're not all like we're withdrawing. And what's interesting is that because the control is so tight and locked down on everybody, that action of withdrawal becomes the truly revolutionary movement that doesn't just change the system, but it kind of changes everything across the board.
Mhm.
Um, and it's powerful, it's important, and it's super cool to see that the dialogue's finally changing. That people are getting that. And I always thought that this was one of the fun secrets is that like through Bitcoin's modeling itself as being an apolitical money, like it actually politicizes itself because of the way that all other monies are so deeply politicized.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. I like that idea of like withdrawal. I think I saw a major Bitcoin battle or Twitter battle between a bunch of people and this guy named Chris Sky, who was saying that, you
Oh
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, he was essentially saying that I think he was like, to really summarize and the argument, his argument was that like going and protesting and yelling about how bad and the lockdowns and stuff is way more productive than buying Bitcoin and withdrawing from the system and creating, you know, a parallel economy. And I think it's the converse. Like we're doing really powerful, meaningful things in defunding the state and starving the beast, and, you know, protecting ourselves from them being able to steal our assets to fund their
Yeah,
endeavor.
like we're actually engaging in a long-term strategy now as opposed to matriarchy. Because like that, and I totally get it. Like it feels really good to get out there and be like, yeah, like fuck the state, like I want to resist, like I'm fighting back. Like there's a personal, emotional, physical feeling that feels really good. Uh, but does it actually make a difference? Absolutely not. Like, is it actually dangerous? Fuck yeah. Like now they know who you are, and you get put on the bad kids list. And it's pretty clear now that like there is a very large list of the bad kids, and it's pretty clear that we're now implementing all of the means for this. If we were to talk about the most radical forms of panoptic power being created, just 5 years ago in 2016, I will. If you told me the stuff that was getting deployed now and the way that they were doing it, I would have said there's no fucking way that people would let that happen in 5 years. No way. Um, which is also weird and interesting that like a lot of my work deals with this idea of like the state of emergency being utilized for like totalitarian governments to essentially implement their plans, and this pandemic lined up pretty perfectly well with it. And it's uh, really scary to see how quickly people are giving over power, and how cool they are with being like, yeah, like if you're not doing all of the vaccine mandates for your business, like your business should be cut off from banking and like you should get shut down. Um, and look, like I don't want to discount the dangers of this pandemic or who it's hurt or how many people are dying. What I just want to point out is that this shit was never supposed to be on the table. Like, we've had many, many, many health crises happen in this country, and we have never had stuff like this be tolerated or allowed. And it's really scary. And what I'm seeing are that these political systems and forms of democracy not only are egregiously failing us in actually getting our rights recognized, but it's the most powerful apparatus in making sure that they all get stripped from us. And so we need alternative methods to protect ourselves individually. And we're only going to get that through using stuff like Bitcoin, but it's also syncing up with other Bitcoiners and starting to essentially start a process of balkanization where like we're creating our own small collectives, individual networks that know each other and how to exchange. And I also think as things get more radical and extreme, like I've had many friends in text who are like, look, when they like come to steal all your property and everything, like come on down. And I hope that I'll never have to actually utilize those invitations. But you know, we live in pretty scary and interesting times. So we need to actually start thinking about how we're going to defeat this system long term in a logical way. And as much as I empathize with Chris Sky and what he's trying to do, let's be clear, it's matriarchy. And it's not going to help. It's actually pretty dangerous, and it's going to make you a target to be picked off individually. And if you really want to do something, start thinking strategically, start moving your wealth into a way that you can protect it, and all of the other different ways. That's one of the cool things about Bitcoin is that as much as we're talking about Bitcoin, we're also talking about fiat food, about uh, well, fiat food's the biggest one that comes to mind, but really changing our time preferences so that instead of us thinking about how we're going to get through next week, we're thinking about how we're going to get through the next 2 generations.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's huge. And I recently went to the city of Tucson, tried to implement vax mandates on city employees. And I went to a protest, uh, kind of to witness it, not to really engage in it because I don't believe, going out and protesting is really productive. And, the things that you're saying, like I felt so exposed, as like being watched by the cops. You had your Antifa like people, show up and start arguing. And, fortunately they didn't get violent, but if that happened, that could have been, dangerous. And it seems, very, very weak. And I think like a rational response to this is just to mandates. And, if you don't believe in it, is just say, okay, we're done with this system and we're exiting. It's not, we're going to go out and like demand that the rulers change their minds or pretend like they actually care what we're saying. They just haven't heard our opinion yet. It's kind of taking matters into your own hands and doing it in a way that's non-violent and actually powerful and tactically advantageous, because like getting thrown in like you just look at January 6th, like what did that accomplish for anybody? It just furthered the security state.
Yeah, and like that's what I really wish everyone would understand across the board is like, look, like this isn't working. And like, not is it just broken, but like it's dangerous now. And like this idea that if we just vote for the right politician, if we just pass the right law, if we just protest just enough, we'll get it. Like I'm sorry, I empathize, but it's foolish. It's foolish, and at this point, it's dangerous.
Hmm.
Like it's pretty clear that uh, its power is continuing to expand. Uh, it really wants to make these vaccine passports. And it's very clear that like this isn't actually about the safety and security of individuals through giving us vaccines and making us safe. Um, Perhaps there's a component of it, but at the end of the day, like it's pretty foolish to have any understanding of history and to think that this is good, and I know it outrages people to make this comparison at times, but like we need to understand that data was an extremely key component of how the Holocaust happened.
Hmm.
They had all of these documents saying, "Hey, check it out! Like you're a Jew, so like I can fucking kill you now." And like when they were originally assembling all of this documents, they like had all of their excuses for why they needed this data and why it was important. But it's very dangerous with an understanding of history. And so, at this point, people that want to go out and protest like that, congratulations. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I hope it makes you feel better because it's not accomplishing anything. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings, but like, join us, think strategically. Like, and I guess that's the other thing that's really important about Bitcoin is I feel like until you've had your moment, your epiphany moment about Bitcoin, it can seem like protesting is the solution. But I think that aha moment for Bitcoin is so key because like it allows for this unlocking to realize like, oh, I can't like we can build a different system. There is a possibility to actually resist in a meaningful way that is nonviolent, can actually protect your assets and other things. But for so many people, they don't have that aha moment. And it's tragic too, because like I know many people that would identify themselves as being on the left or the far left, and to me, like I would think that this would be the key thing that would just have them drop everything and run over to understand. But alas, here we are. But yeah, the nonviolent component is extremely important because I feel like it actually gives us the political method to actually change things by creating a new system.
Yeah, exactly. And like engaging in violence and protests is really bad because that's the state's, realm. And like if you look at mixed martial arts, for example. Conor McGregor sucks on the ground. He has very poor jujitsu. And for him to go down and try and take somebody to the ground that is superior in that than he is a really, really poor strategy. And so he'll try and stand up and he gets demolished on the ground. That's why he's continued to lose over and over again. And it's like, it's even more extreme when you're dealing with the state that has endless resource and weapons. Like, it's just, I think it's really, really stupid to try and like engage in violence against the state at this point with where we're at.
Oh, absolutely. Like and it's not to look like perhaps it would feel great and perhaps it's justified, but like it's just not going to work, and any inkling towards violence like that allows for the entire security apparatus to like activate and go do whatever it wants to do.
Yeah.
Um, and again, that's part of what and like that's why my website is crypto sovereignty and not Bitcoin sovereignty. It's Bitcoin is the apex of how we establish this totally new sovereign system, but cryptography is what powers the whole thing. And to me, the important, like if you're one of these rabble rousers that wants to go out these protests and like you're really committed to actually creating change, like go do the real work to create change, like figure out how to use the dark nets, understand how to use peer-to-peer cryptography, understand why Bitcoin is actually allowing you to do this, get all your wealth out of the banks. Like I saw Chris Sky was so critical. He was like, oh, look, you can't, if you have a bank account, like shut the fuck up or whatever. And it's like, look, like we're all going to continue to need to play citizen as we need to, but there's another identity that we can have as well, and it's going to be a very important one in the future. And when it's time to make that change, like be ready for it, and like this is one of the cool things I got from talking to people in Miami is that like we're out here at the foreground talking about all this stuff happening, but like there are like these sleeper cells buried everywhere who are like deep in these like three-lettered agencies and stuff too, like it's a real Fight Club kind of idea of like, look, like this is Project Mayhem, and like everybody is already understanding what's going on and is reorganizing for it. And to me, like that's kind of the most exciting thing is like there's all of this underground movement that's happening, uh, that isn't, not only is it really important and is creating this general infrastructure that we need, but it's also like a super cool aesthetics to have too, that like we're part of these, secret networks that are operating to like help one another create the freedom and liberty that they want to have, and have a private life that's meaningful and full and blessed versus kind of the fiat gray despondency of nihilism.
Hmm. And I think that's why Bitcoin meetups are so important. Like
Absolutely.
yeah.
There's a word for like the meeting of community in Sanskrit for like essentially in the Hindu community when people get together with their community and they like have these sort of spiritual awakenings occur from it, and it's called satsang. And both from my own experience and from at this point more than a dozen Bitcoiners, like they've had that experience as well, just being with other Bitcoiners. And I know for me, this is very true too, is particularly with my political views and standpoints, like it's very isolating and difficult out in the world if I want to actually be my truest self and honest. But when I meet up with Bitcoiners, it's meeting up with my brothers and sisters who speak and think like I do. And it is such a rejuvenating and brightening experience for me. Like I feel like after Miami, I felt so just open hearted because of how much love I was experiencing, but like a true human agape kind of love, like this like, oh, we're actually participating in something that is bigger than us and like actually is important. And if we play our cards right, a century into the future, we'll be celebrated as heroes who actually helped get this ball rolling and getting it to where it needed to go to actually make sure that people have free money in terms of them being able to have an open network that respects their privacy, is fair across the board, and isn't giving benefits to individuals of government or of wealth and power over any other.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty crazy to think on that time scale, and I think that's one of the things that kind of circling back to the protester again. If they're thinking in very high time preference, they're reacting, trying to um, stop something that's already happening versus thinking the long term of dismantling the structure that's creating the circumstances that they're unhappy with. And yeah, it's there. I made a pretty firm commitment to keep the Bitcoin meetups going, regardless of future lockdowns if they happen. Right now we're looking pretty good in Arizona, but they they shut down the entire society, and I don't think that um, they're going to shrug at the opportunity to do it again in the future. And it's for that reason, like it is.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
it's deployed now. Like they know they can do it. They know we'll respond to it. Um, like it's one of the things I've been fascinating since the beginning of the pandemic is just how powerful all of the propaganda is, and how much I sincerely don't know what's true anymore. And it's really scary because like that's sort of a one-time move that like government can completely bankrupt its ability to tell truth. Uh, and I think it's really important because I think at this point you can be like, oh, like I can't understand anything that's coming out anymore. Like I think I just need to admit that it's broken and it's time to move on. And furthermore to the political thing, like I want to emphasize like how much I empathize because I was right there for the longest time. And like there's this deep idea of hope that you have established that like if we can just get the right thing to happen, uh and I'm sorry, it's just not true. And the other one is that it's really daunting and overwhelming, particularly if you don't have the understanding like Bitcoin of we do, of like how do you actually disassemble this system in any meaningful way on a long-term scale. And it just doesn't seem possible. And I think that's one of the reasons why, again, coming back to Bitcoin, if people are worried about the political situation, like this is the key to them understanding because it allows for a long-term viewpoint to disassemble it. Another thing that I've been getting much more hard up on recently is like, look, like it's time to get in the lifeboat. Like the thing is fucking sinking. Like anybody with two eyeballs and two brain cells can put that together. Like it's the math doesn't work. Like if you just read the news, like all of these projections, like nothing looks good. Particularly with this Monday with the shit that's coming out of China and stuff. Like
yeah,
it looks like contagion is a very real thing. And like because we're in the middle of it, like it's so hard for people to see like how radically different the monetary system is right now from any other time in human history. Like they created more money in the last year than was like even in fucking existence before 2008. And like that money is coming to the system and the Cantillon effect is about to blow out fucking hard. And so like whatever your preference is, uh inflation is coming. It's going to hurt a lot of people very dramatically if they have their money in any kind of normal asset, particularly bonds or just money itself. Like prepare to get fucked. And so pretty much everybody who I've met, I've been like, look, if you want a lifeboat that's not going to inflate away, like you need to own some Bitcoin. Do everything you can to understand it now. um, and then they usually try to ask me about it, and I give them some deep rabbit hole wacky answer that confuses them more than it helps them. So
yeah, yeah. It's the other things that I'm looking at is like the supply chain issues have been ridiculous, and so there's the monetary aspect of it, but it's so bad right now too. There's the physical goods aspect of it. Of we're starting to see rationing happen around the country because there's such large shortages, and it's so difficult to do things like furnish a house, or you get these extremely long wait times, and it's not going to get any better anytime soon with what's going on, the breakdowns in China, and um,
Well, a great way to think about it is like, like money is the liquid that our economy runs on. It's gasoline, if you will. And essentially what happened was like because of the coronavirus, everything got really sludged up. It was almost like putting oil in the engine, which was causing its own problems to not be working. So we like cut the thing as much as we fucking could, and then we dumped all that into the engine, and it fired it up super hard. But because of that, we have all of this disharmony in the engine, and so all of these problems are starting to break down. That are, they're on these tertiary levels that aren't obvious or forward right away. Like this is the constant problem of government regulation. Is like duh, we'll like change this thing, and they think that the economy is a static item that isn't dynamically responding to them. And lo and behold, like these are the kind of situations we get. And for me personally, like with these supply chain issues and seeing all this stuff, it was very clear to me like I think being in a city is a great plan to find yourself on the east side of the wall of that balkanization.
mhm.
um
Yeah.
and like get to a place that like you can grow your own food, where like you can know somebody that like has goats or cows that you can get stuff from. Like you should probably have chickens or be getting your eggs locally. And like also you're going to get like way higher quality food and have great conversations with people and meet your neighbors and feel better because you're not supporting this fucked up agriculture holocaust going on. But and to me, like these are also the systems that are going to build up, that are going to create these new collectives and networks, and essentially the remnant that's going to be able to find themselves as a functional society outside of uh yeah. And like I hate to just call it kind of communism, because like it's not it's this weird like corporate communism that's like this weird like half aborted amalga of like both things smashed together with the shittiest parts of both. But that's kind of what it is. It's going to be, you're going to get like your Walmart coin that's like paid directly to you from the US government, while you get to go like, and like you'll have your time at like 3:30 a.m. like every other Wednesday for like 2 hours that you can go into Walmart to like get all of your goods as quickly as you can.
Yeah. That brings up something funny. I've had a few people in the past show me a shitcoin that they argue has value because Walmart's using it. But yeah, so you mentioned a couple things. So like moving out of the cities, that's something that I've done personally because I don't want to be trapped in a really bad, dangerous situation. Something
Hmm.
that Laser Hodl has been saying a lot is make tyranny more expensive. And I think when you move out of the city, it makes it a lot more difficult to corral and control individuals. So I think that's really powerful. And then you mentioned the remnant, which has been a topic I've been focusing on a lot. Alex Svetsky brought that up a couple weeks ago when I had him on, and gave me some assigned reading to read Isaiah's Job, which is really interesting piece. I think is incredibly powerful. Um, what's kind of your understanding of or belief of like what is this remnant that's being described by people?
Uh, well, I would just call it like a remnant of people, like actual human beings.
Yeah.
Because like the Borg is pretty much like absorbing everybody right now. And as much as like I would like to think people are like hyper aware of it and like trying to respond, like it's pretty clear that like most people are not gonna make it. Um, and like if you're gonna make it, you need to like kind of go through this basic like cypherpunk boot camp and like get your wealth into Bitcoin. But it's also like figuring out, like we're in the very beginning of this process, which is essentially everybody's kind of extracting and rescuing themselves like from fiatism. And so like I think this next portion is kind of like the wandering, where like everybody kind of sets up their own little spot, and people will kind of amalgamate in different places. But like it's I think for the next while it's going to feel kind of like a listlessness of like a wandering people. You know, and we're already seeing that with, I know that there are Bitcoiners that are expats from both Canada and Australia who like aren't going back and they can't go back and won't go back. And like that's kind of part of this remnant. And I think it's the way that essentially we're going to be holding together our own culture, and that through the sacrifices and changes that we've been willing to make and the sort of aesthetics and values that we create, there's going to be a whole new culture that we've created and is going to blossom out of essentially Bitcoiners. But it's not just like Bitcoin's kind of like the main object of our reverence, but it's also a total change in form of lifestyle that I would say is fundamentally like anti-fiatism. You
Mm.
know, so it understands the lowest of time preferences. I think there'll be this aesthetic amongst the remnant of these very low time preference things. Like, you know, I think individuals that have long-term orchards established will be kind of seen as this, you know, very beautiful and important thing that like all Bitcoiners are supposed to have, and that like, you know, Bitcoiners of the remnant like have their ranches and their food networks established so that they'll operate into perpetuity. In addition to like they'll probably have different and various long-term exchanges established with other remnants. And eventually these remnants, as they sort of coalesce, those eventually form, you know, essentially what will be citadels, which will be the forefront of what I hope to be essentially this new network of city states that will eventually kind of fall under, you know, I hope it would look something similar to like the Holy Roman Empire with, you know, you have these amalga of like 500 different principalities, but they're all sort of federated under this one generalized agreement that essentially is Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's fascinating to think about how that plays out, and we're seeing it. You know, we're seeing it. The move. One of the things you mentioned is like this. I forgot how you said it, but it was like the food genocide or something like that. Um,
Oh yeah, the agricultural holocaust.
yeah,
I mean, like you know, anybody who's gone into any kind of industrial farm, like this is fucking horrible. Like these are actual like living beings, and furthermore, like you're gonna put it in your body, dude. Like Jesus Christ, like do you want to eat something that's been wandering around its own shit for its entire life? Like ugh, you know. And that's also part of fiatism, I think, is this lobotomization of like not understanding that like your consumerism is actually like linked to this whole network. And to me, like that's one of the other important things about essentially like getting onto this Bitcoin standard is that like, uh, you know, like I think consumerism is like a nice thing. It's like good to live in like a warm home and like have technology and all of these things, but we can totally shorten down that network and localize it much more deeply. And even beyond just the localism, you know, really selecting spots where we want to support people. And to me, like as these Bitcoin exchange networks grows, like that's sort of the greatest preference is that like as more and more people transact and use only Bitcoin, I'm going to make the decision if there's two guys selling eggs, I'm going to buy eggs from the guy who sells it for Bitcoin. You know, because I want to give him Bitcoin, and I know similarly I'm going to only accept Bitcoin, and then we got this great circular network going.
yeah, that's something that we're working on. Is in Arizona is something along the lines of that. I don't want to go into too many details, but I think like the introduction of Bitcoin into farmers markets, where local food growers that are practicing actual uh, ethical and sustainable practices is so incredibly empowering. And you know, this movement around regenerative agriculture is really fascinating to me. I think is one of the more incredibly important things and that's happening right now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that coupled
You
with
know, and I was just going to also point out, you know, for farmers specifically, like let's be clear, like you guys were on the forefront of a lot of wars that governments has had against people in these small levels, you know, and so like if you're, you know, if you're a goat milk farmer and you want to sell raw milk, like I welcome you to sell raw milk openly and like accept Bitcoin. And then when the state comes to absolutely crush you because, you know, what I think one person dies every 3 years of raw milk or something, you know, meanwhile, you can go get your opioids that kill 50,000. Anyways, um, you know, like, and these are all the networks I want to see start generating. You know, furthermore, I'd like to see people in states where cannabis is illegal to grow cannabis and sell it for Bitcoin. You know, I'm like, these are all the really important things that I think is going to develop over the next decade. Um, and it's super cool because I feel uh, like we're at the very beginning of like all of this really important changes. Like the last 10 years of Bitcoin was really about all of its technical development, making the network more robust, like getting this sort of monetary base infused into it. And so like the upcoming decade is about like all of these new networks that are going to form around Bitcoin and create these powerful counter economic responses to fiatism. And it's just really exciting because people really need something like this. You know, like the to me, like that's the thing that's the most important about Bitcoin is it's not it's about this recognition that there is a possibility of self sovereignty and empowerment in this world, and that through that recognition, like it activates this extremely powerful thing inside of people to where they become somebody that they never expected they could have the power to become. And to me, like that's the thing I am really excited about because I've seen that activate in several people, and uh, yeah, it makes them so much bigger and more powerful than they ever expected themselves to be. Um, and that's really what Bitcoin is about. Because when we have that self empowerment of knowing that our wealth is protected, we can provide for ourselves, we can give to our families, that we can be self sovereign, we start to actually be able to become bigger and step into this role that I think at this point in time is you know, almost the destiny of our generation is to reclaim the form of politics that was reserved only for us. You know, and that was promised to us not only in the Declaration of Independence and the rights of man, but you know, just going back to the values of both the Magna Carta and the 12 tablets, that there are simply certain rights that men are dignified to give to themselves and only themselves. And it's time that we reclaim that for ourselves, and we can use this tool to do that.
I was at a Bitcoin conference in Nebraska a couple weeks ago, and I did a presentation on time preference. And one of the slides I brought up was Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and I was explaining how pretty much all of the state actions that have happened, for a long time, are attacking those basic needs of people, and how disempowering it is, and how it kind of psychologically keeps people stuck in this fiat thinking and fiat system. And I think like the transformation you're talking about, with Bitcoin, is there's so much power and security, and I guess not necessarily, yeah, empowerment from having a money that can't get confiscated, censored, and and is not being debased, and how much of a radical change that is for people to cover that base layer of personal security, where I mean, you're just seeing attacks left and right. So like the Biden administration wants to uh, monitor every transaction over $600. Tucson specifically is trying to attack all sorts of cash transactions that are happening, to bring it into the ability to be taxed and confiscated. And I think like looking at it from just like a basic level of like that Maslow hierarchy of needs is one of my favorite illustrations to give to people to understand basic psychology of like, you have to hit, like, if you're triaging, if you have somebody that doesn't have security, is on the they're struggling mentally, emotionally, maybe has substance abuse, you have to go back to the base layer of like, okay, you take care of security, you take care of these other basic needs, you look at relationships, and now you can start talking about stepping into purpose and meaning. But if somebody's like really unstable in their life, trying to tell them like, oh, you just need to step into a higher calling and purpose, it's they struggle to understand that or attain that. I think it's, yeah, I like.
Absolutely, you know, and like that to me, like that's really what modernity is about on a whole. And like, I don't want to blame just the state. Like, it's the allies of corporatism have absolutely in the technological age taken this to a hyper place that like it was never possible without technology, but like everything's made to disempower you and enslave you. And then I know that there are so many people out there that are working shitty low wage jobs who come home and are absolutely crushed because of not only all of the garbage that's thrown at them day in and day out, but like you're paid this slave wage for it. It feels inescapable. You have all these ads inundating you about, you know, that your body's not good looking enough, that you're not fit enough, you're not smart enough, you're not rich enough. It's, you know, and all of these things to really break you down. And it's unfortunate about how much it really takes away from stuff. Um, okay, good. My wife got that. You know, and I know from my experience with understanding Bitcoin and the empowerment it created in me, that that was a really important step that is allowing me to progress now and become somebody that I didn't expect for myself to become.
Mm.
Um, you know, and I actually have an essay written about this, about what I call the pedagogy of Bitcoin. That's based off of Paulo Freud's book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which essentially, you know, this is what Paulo Freud calls a consensero, which is this idea of critical consciousness raising,
Mhm.
and essentially educating people like, look, like the financial system's like the main tool they use to oppress you and keep you under their thumb. And if we can teach you about Bitcoin, the self empowerment and the self sovereignty that you get from holding your own Bitcoin and your own wealth there, like the kind of oppression that you suffer under is no longer actually viable. And furthermore, there becomes all of these new modes that you can have to actually not just have personal security, but also to continue to build your own wealth in a way to know that the state can't just whittle it away from you. And I think we're at that place right now, and I'm really excited to see how much wonderful Bitcoin content is out there and has been generated for people to understand it deeper. Because now we have all these people attacking it from all these different directions and kind of describing Bitcoin in all these different ways that nobody had before. And I think it's really, really helpful for people from all sorts of different walks of life and perspective to be able to really get a deeper understanding of how Bitcoin can help them and how it can serve them explicitly in their own context.
Mhm. Absolutely. How do you think Bitcoin has changed your view on parenting, and
Hmm.
how are you
Oh,
there?
great question. Um, I think about my death more intimately in terms of that I will die, and like I need to figure out how my Bitcoin is going to actually be inherited by my kids. And so I think that's one spot, but I think just the whole change in time preference to become lower. First of all, I think that helped me recognize, like, you know, why I have two children now, not like I wanted another child because my low time preference essentially that I knew I'd get old one day. And if, you know, something cataclysmic happened to my first child, I want a backup, you know, like that's the very detached, emotionless view of it. You know, the other was I didn't feel the same anxiety I felt my entire life about how was I going to provide, because I actually had this real object of savings. And granted, with all of its volatility and blah 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 blah, you know, I have real conviction and faith about its ability to deflate over time, and more people to want to own this unseizable hardest asset that there is. And that faith of like having real savings, like not like just numbers in a bank account, but an actual object that I feel like people would have revered like gold at one point in time, and the way that gold was probably passed from generation to generation. I feel like I now have an actual nest egg that's like worth something that I can pass on to my kids, which has really helped me just the idea of even having something like that to pass on to your kids like allows for you to think deeper. And I ultimately think that these are really important thoughts about death, you know, and like we are going to die. It's important to understand we will die, and how do we want to be prepared for our death. Because although I'm absolutely not ready to die, I want to be prepared to die. And I think that's one of the ideas that Bitcoin has really given me is how am I going to prepare to die in a meaningful way so that when it does come, I'm ready for it and I can actually take care of it and handle it.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I've definitely like thought about stuff like that a lot. The idea of uh, I uh, getting lost. Let me gather my thoughts. So, like, my dad died pretty when I was pretty young, when I was like 15, And so that put, death kind of like right in my face. And I think like a lot of people are disconnected from death. It's interesting. I studied this in school, was how the Industrial Revolution changed our relationship with death, where it became a lot less intimate, and we didn't, see it when you had 70% of the population spread out and farming. Somebody died, the dead body would actually be in their home, and there'd be more of a, you know, connection to that. And you contrast that today, where it's so far removed, where oftentimes people die alone in hospitals and, old people homes. And um, it's it's interesting to see people's responses to this pandemic, where they're so terrified of the possibility of death, when it's, one of the most natural and the only thing that is like for sure going to happen to us in life. And so it's interesting to hear you kind of talk about that, as like how Bitcoin has. Yeah.
I think that's really what fiatism is at the end of the day, and actually really is statism, is because like this is all a projection of actual biopower, and that's like the state is able to maintain its power through the idea of it gives you life. And I think particularly because we're so deep into modernity, of this hyper high time preference culture that wants to sell you things continuously, that you only have value as a working body that can be a consumer. So everything in the society is about getting us as far away from the possibility of understanding or thinking about our death, and is really about trying to create the most inauthentic form of existence that there can be, which is one that doesn't understand that you will die, and that's important. And I think it's really interesting that you hear from these, like powerful tech VCs about their own pedantic fantasies of like not wanting to fucking die, and it's pathetic. It's childish. Like you will die. I think it's pretty funny that like you're haunted by it so much that you want to try to create technologies to live forever. But furthermore, like we detach from that our death can be a good thing, and that it not only allows for us to come to terms with our own actual limits in the world, but our ability to figure out what's the legacy I want to leave. How do I want to become the person that I can die and I can feel good about who that person was and the legacy I left behind.
Mhm.
And with fiatism, it's kind of impossible to do that, because like there's no way to save money in a meaningful way to pass it on to anybody. You're always kind of hyper vigilant about the state being able to come and tax you out of existence or take things away from you. um, and furthermore, the way that this pandemic has, um, it's hard for me to talk about this and not feel kind of spiteful, because like I really just feel like it's like my parents' generation. I just feel like they're really cowards at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Like I think they're very greedy, and like I have a very bitter taste in my mouth, because like I feel like most of the problems of the world today, I don't want to say are their fault, but like they definitely didn't make a strong effort to try to stop it. And furthermore, they really seem to want to stand in the way. And for me, the last straw was, like however you feel about this pandemic or not, it seems to be dramatically affecting the older than the younger. Also, like once you get below 50, it seems like the death rate, is comparable to the flu. And furthermore, I think there's only like a couple hundred of children that have died from COVID in the United States, which is much less than the flu annually.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, like I say, sequester the old, let us get back to life. And the fact that they want to violently violate pretty much every single right that was afforded to us into the Constitution, but also create all of these other crazy networks of panoptic power that, I want to be very clear, they have no fucking understanding at all how this shit functions. To them, it's all just magic in the computer, which enrages me even more about how gross their misunderstanding of how this technology functions is, and how they're so willing to give it away to the powers that be because of their own fear and terror of wanting to live for a couple more years. Um, to me, that's horrific and gross. And I'm sorry, like my answer is, do I want to be selfish and see that you die? yeah, if it means you want to stop all of society on the other side, yes. And if you want to push me into an encampment that makes me your enemy, that's my truth. Like, I don't think it's fair or worthwhile to shut down society, to shut down schools, to traumatize children. But more importantly, to create a culture of fear and terror where death is the thing that must be prevented at all causes. How about we talk about making death meaningful and actually being able to approach it in a way where we're not just terrified by it and that we accept it as part of our life? Um, you know, and I just feel very angry about all of these facts that are put in front of me. Like, I'm supposed to pay Social Security. Meanwhile, it's this fun joke that like, haha, you won't have Social Security when you're old. It's always given to you that way. Like, fuck you. Like I contributed as much to the system as you are, if not even more, and I'm not supposed to get anything for it. And that's just one of the things that I've found so upsetting about what's going on is that everything just feels two-faced, and like nothing's really sincere. And at the end of the day, they want to have this collectivist sacrifice to make sure that the old are going to survive for a few more years. Meanwhile, like most of the generation that's 35 and under is left pretty close to poverty. So end of my rant there. I just, it hurts more than anything. It hurts to be part of a society that wants to sacrifice its youth like that.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you on that. And what's interesting, my mom might not even get Social Security where we're at. So it's not just
Yeah,
us not getting it. But yeah, I mean, I think the idea of like the older generations being cowardly, like right now is not a time to be a coward. It's a time of what I believe is non-compliance. Like we just see the stuff happening, and I think part of the reason I think they're intentionally trying to traumatize the population in order to push through these changes, because when people are terrified, they're a lot more compliant. Um, but yeah, I mean, you
absolutely.
just like I had a few breakdowns over the past year where I just was so fed up with it. More kids have died in Tucson of suicide than of COVID. There's been I don't know, maybe like 30 suicides and like maybe one COVID death, of a kid. And then school districts in Las Vegas had a like this is not the future that I would want to bring somebody into, where this is the norm. And so I think it's interesting. We've seen things like homeschool movements grow up and become huge, and I'm a huge supporter of that. Um, of getting kids away from the state indoctrination, kind of going back to the conversation of like, um, how does Bitcoin influence your parenting? Like, how do you explain and talk to your kids about this stuff?
That's these are great questions. My kids are in a private charter school. Well, my one who's old enough to be, and it's great. Like they have forest days all the time. And before that, he was at a Montessori school where they taught him about God and that there is this other force in the world, and you have a soul and this great stuff. Um, yeah, it's pretty hard because like my son, he's like a real smart, serious kid too. He's 6 right now. So I explain it to him as straightforward as I can, and I tell him, look, like you know, daddy's been participating in this movement for a while, and like we fundamentally want to change what money is, and like, well, why do you want to do that? Well, we believe that, money should operate fairly for everybody across the board. Like it should always have the same generalized supply so that everybody knows how much it is. I usually use a pie to explain. I'm like, look, if we have a pie, and if I like bake this second pie and go, well, like this is the special pie that I can only eat, like that's not really fair for everybody else that I introduce a whole nother pie that mixes in with the system. And I really just kind of keep it at like, look, like I'm doing something I really believe in, and I think that this is the most important and substantial change that I can be doing to contribute to the world. Because like he actually asked me like, you're not working at a normal job anymore, Dad. So like, why do you keep having these like podcast things that you're going on? Like, I don't understand. Like, are you paid or something? And I'm like, no. Look like this. I was like, this is my real work in the world. Like, I happen to be fortunate enough that we were thoughtful and put our savings in Bitcoin, and that's worked out really well. And I now have a responsibility to go and tell other people why Bitcoin is really important and how it can protect them and how it can protect their privacy. And I think another thing I've explained to him is I'm like, look, if I have a bunch of money in the car and I'm driving somewhere and a police officer pulls me over, he could just take all that money from me, you know, and like that's not fair and it's not right, but he can do that, and that's happened to a lot of people. And I don't want that to ever happen to anybody else because I think stealing is wrong, and even if a police officer is stealing is wrong. So that's really what a lot of this stuff is about. And like it's going to be really fascinating to see who he becomes as a person, and not just my son, but there's a whole generation of I guess Bitcoiners, and like the first true Bitcoiners who are raised as Bitcoiners, and it's going to be really fascinating to see like who they become as people, and like it's exciting to think about the idea of high school students whose dads were hardcore OG Bitcoiners who like when their school district's fucking up, like they can figure out some way to like definance the school district and like redirect all funds using Bitcoin or something like that. Or maybe like, kids sports teams have their own treasuries. Because I think that's one of the other things that'll start to like come along that people will figure out is that like essentially like education networks are these really powerful collectives that are self-enforcing and mutualized, and that really having the state involved is not only this parasitic thing that like fucks it all up, but it introduces all of these really weird morals and creates authoritarian structures that are parasitic, and like that'll push up into the high school and secondary levels and then eventually to college, where I think like once we have like a radicalized movement of Bitcoiners like in 4-year institutions talking about how they're going to like renew their actual universities to like be for them, there's going to be some really cool stuff that gets activated. And I think these are all of the sort of anarcho-syndicalist things that I was talking about early on, about how we'll see all these new networks bubble up and they're becoming these mutual networks of solidarity that force radical change because of the way that they're actually attacking the thing that's meaningful. They're going after the money instead of protesting outside with their signs.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the idea of raising kids is really, really interesting because, I grew up in somewhat of a statist family, totalitarian structure, very, very strict religious values, and became a bit of an anarchist. And then I've seen people that have grown up in, freer structures and have become totalitarian totalitarian statists. So it's really the idea of like raising kids and the different things and influences on them and allowing them to grow, and like how your values are brought into parenting, I think is a very, very interesting conversation for sure. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's one that most people just because of the general unawareness that there is around fiatism and kind of that financing, I don't think there's ever a grander conversation that can happen. And I think it's a very natural conversation that is already occurring for a lot of Bitcoiners, and as more people turn to it, it'll be a sensible integration. And like I'm sure as my son gets older, like he'll realize like, oh, like dad's really big about Bitcoin because of his whole like anti-war stance, and like he'll learn more about my own history, and like part of why I'm so ardently anti-war is like my father fought, or my grandfather fought in World War II. And just on his deathbed, he shared some pretty dramatic stories about like killing other men with knives and like having to hold them dying, and how he was like, "This will never ever become clean." And like I'm like he was a really great man his whole life, and like on his deathbed, 60 some odd years later, like that's the thing that haunted him, and he like made me promise that I'd never kill people to him. And I never realized how substantial and important that was for me, but it was this truly important thing that I hope when I share all of these facts with my own son, he'll be like right fucking on. Like I have this, family dynastic obligation not to kill people because of, the horrors that it brought upon my great grandfather. And I want to make sure that I continue a legacy that my father wanted to continue to live on for him.
Yeah. Yeah. Those family legacies are powerful. And I think like kind of going back to, I mean, I think the idea of death and familiarizing ourselves with it and becoming more comfortable with it is important, because the fact that life is finite is what makes, the things we do today powerful. And if we were to live forever, it wouldn't the our actions wouldn't really have a ton of meaning behind them in the same way, I think. And it's something that I found incredibly powerful about my father's death. It was like going and looking at the legacy that he passed on and seeing the people that his lives touched. It was a pretty powerful experience. It took me a few years to figure it out, of grieving, to figure out it was a powerful experience. But um yeah, it's fascinating to and incredibly important to think about. And yeah.
Yeah, and likewise, like my father-in-law, he committed suicide a few years ago, and like we were left to kind of pick up all the pieces. And one of the things that really dawned on me was, I was like, wow, like I don't ever want to leave my family to pick up my pieces like this. Like I want to make sure that when I'm dead, some lawyer manifests up out of nowhere and he's like, hey, I'm Eric's like dead lawyer guy. I'm taking care of everything. you know and furthermore, like, I want this experience to go deeper, of that, I now will have a friend that shows up and he'll be like, all right, Eric's son, like it's time to do the key exchange, and he'll like start our Bitcoin ritual to like do the Bitcoin key exchange for him to inherit my legacy. But I it's really exciting because like this is also part of that aesthetic of the remnant that's going to start to form as well. It is understanding that our family's wealth, and like you don't spend the Bitcoin, and like that's like the family rule. Like the Bitcoin are not to be spent. Like the Bitcoin are made to protect us. And I hope that maybe it'll be my son or his son. There will be like some debate at some point in time that they have to escape the country and spend some of the Bitcoin to do it. Well, like this is the one time that it's appropriate to spend the Bitcoin. But yeah, these values are going to push into our children. And it's really exciting to know that not only my children, but there's a whole slew of other children are going to be raised with a deep low time preference that I really hope will, become kind of the solid foundational bonds that will create these remnant communities of that, like Bitcoin is our core value and asset that we treat as a sacrosanct. And I know that your family does as well. And we interact with each other and, help each other because of that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Kind of wrapping up, I got one last question, or well, I think I might ask another question, but
All right.
what do you think like the psychological impacts of lack of privacy are on a society or an individual?
Um, I mean, it fundamentally transforms the individual. Like you can't actualize who you are without privacy. You need the ability to experiment and to know you're not being monitored, and to try new things and to fail and to be confused and to do things that are embarrassing or that you don't want shared. Like we need that as human beings. Like it's an important developmental aspect of who we are. And I think more importantly, it like the disempowerment is so great and so wide that it crushes us fundamentally as human beings and like who we can be. And to me, like that's one of the things that like I actually find is fundamentally messianic about Bitcoin, is that like there's this ability, like even in the totality that like is the all powerful panopticon, that like if you are rolling and executing asymmetric cryptography correctly, like you can have actual privacy.
Mm.
That like no matter how powerful the thing is, like there's always a way to create privacy once again. And to me, like this hidden jewel that like God has ensured us just through the fundamental physics of how mathematics operates in the world, that we can always find this ribosome of privacy. And I think Bitcoin, is part of that great equation that gives us the ability to attain privacy once again and know that we can have that because it's through that privacy and the personal, what is to be called the private self, the deepest and most inner sense of who you are. Like that's something that isn't meant or supposed to be seen by anybody. And so I think that's going to be one of the things that remnant culture is going to produce, is that privacy will be a very deep value. People will be very suspicious of technology and its monitoring capabilities, and that people are going to roll full stacks of open source software utilizing encrypted communications. And I think because of this culture that's going to be created, that we're going to really understand once again why privacy is a right that we need as people to have developed. And I think that's going to be one thing in our culture we'll develop very deeply. And I think that's one thing that we're going to lose in contemporary culture. And it's very sad because I think, we're essentially all going to live in very 1984 style worlds where, we'll like get a free television sponsored by Sony, but like it always has to be on and they're always going to be data mining whatever we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally see that with the smart speakers.
Yeah. And it's scary how people are like, yay, like Siri can hear everything I'm saying.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, you've already seen that in like places like Singapore where they've had like state launches of Fitbits to like every citizen. So they're collecting, I imagine, yeah, stuff like that's here and it's happening. You got anything to plug? Any new writing or projects you're working on?
I've been so focused on escaping where I was and getting to my new home in the country, and like for the past month, I've just been doing like forestry work outside, which has been super fun. I've loved, but it's taken away from some of my writing. I'm gonna have a couple new things coming out. Hopefully in the next couple months. They're writings that I've been working on for a long time. I've just found that I'm much deeper and interested in kind of these esoteric aspects and deep philosophical aspects of Bitcoin. Like right now, the thing I'm really hung up on is like the linguistic and semantic components and makeup like of Bitcoin and like what it is as a language, because like we can read it but it can't be spoken, and like we can recognize it but like we can't modify it, and like there's just some really really important and deep philosophical ideas going on with the actual nature of language with Bitcoin. And then a post that is probably going to come out sooner than that, I just call the pedagogy of Bitcoin, which deals essentially with understanding cryptography like as an actual form of power and knowledge, that like once we understand that, along with understanding what makes Bitcoin unique and important in the sea of shitcoins, essentially there's a new form of empowerment that like makes our oppression no longer viable, and like we can actually create economic self-sovereignty, which then pushes out into social self-sovereignty and then political self-sovereignty by the very virtue of the fact that we can possess and own our economic wealth outside and beyond the state.
Awesome. And then, for myself, and I'm really looking forward to that article you were talking about, that book that you were reading last time we were on, pedagogy of what's it called?
Yeah, and this is the same one, pedagogy of the oppressed. So hopefully that'll be coming out in the next few weeks. So
and then for listeners, for myself, do you have any assigned reading that you would give out to people?
If you're still just trying to understand stuff, I always recommend Gigi's 21 Lessons for kind of the basic stuff. And then if you just want to dive deeper into kind of my own esoteric thoughts around Bitcoin, my website's cryptosovereignty.org. I have a couple posts pinned there, and people really like my Crypto Truth and Power, because that's kind of I'd say that's sort of my introductory article of like where my train of thought starts from, and kind of helps unfold a lot of the ideas around sovereignty that I'm engaging in.
Awesome. I'm going to be shilling that one. It's a good one.
Nice, man. Well, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I always really appreciate your thoughtful and poignant questions, which is why I was excited to come back on.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to listening to this through so I can actually process through the stuff you're saying instead of having to think too much about questions. But thanks for
awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate it and hope that you enjoy the rest of your Monday.
You too. Yeah, that was an awesome conversation with Erik. Love sitting down and chatting with this guy. But yeah, these types of conversations get me really, really excited. This is a future I want to move into, a future where the individual is free to make decisions for themselves and is not just a slave to this horrific system that is just built to benefit these parasites that sit on top and have power because of fiat authority, just because they declare it. There's no legitimacy. And it's interesting to think about a future like that, and it's interesting to actually take action and move towards a future like that. And Bitcoin, regardless of what we do, it's going to win this, because people are going to adopt it because of how broken the system is. It's just the case over and over again, is that markets are the most powerful force in history. You know, you just cannot stop it. Like, people will go and get the goods. The more that they hamper the markets, the more that black markets rise, and Bitcoin is uncensorable money, and it's gonna facilitate that so much more than it has in the past. And yeah, I'm stoked on it. But yeah, we got big things coming. Check out the Arizona Bitcoin Network. We got some awesome meetups coming up. And yeah, check out my other show, Toxic Airwaves. We're having a blast on there with my co-host Skeef. Awesome conversations, awesome chat. We like to interact with the audience either in chat, or you can call in using Twitter Spaces and argue with us about why you think we should be calling our politicians, or why you think your shitcoin is legitimate, or why, you know, whatever. We have awesome discussion there, and check that out Monday nights at 5:30. But yeah, have a good one.